I would like to welcome you back to our study in the book of Philippians. Today we're in Philippians, the 4th chapter, starting with verse 8. Now, throughout this week, we're going to be talking about the Apostle Paul's final instruction to this church that he was deeply in love with. And so we need to understand that the background of these instructions, even though they might seem a little harsh at sometimes, we need to understand that he loves this church. He was deeply in love with this church. This church has supported him several times in the ministry. This church is the home of one of his greatest co-workers by the name of Epaphroditus. And so we need to understand that the Apostle Paul, in these final instructions, it's coming from a heart filled with love. And so the Apostle Paul writes in verse number 8, and he says, "Finally, brethren." Now, he says finally, and then he continues on for several more verses and a couple of different subjects. He's a classic preacher. Anyway, it says, "Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence and anything worthy of praise," he says, "dwell on these things." Now, we're going to take each one of those things, but we need to understand that the Apostle Paul is wanting them to think about this, to meditate on this, to dwell on these things. And the first thing that the Apostle Paul lists here, he says, whatever is true. Now, the word true here, it means things that are real or things that are sincere, literally things that are uncovered. The literal word here, if you take it apart, it's a compound word, but it actually means to uncover something. In other words, the things that you know deep down in your heart to be true. What does Paul say? You need to dwell on those things. Don't dwell on false things. Don't dwell on rumors. Don't dwell on someone else's ideas, but dwell on the things that you know for sure are true. That God is a good God, that God is a just God, that God is a loving God, that God is a faithful God, that you are born again, that you are the righteousness of God in Christ, that heaven is your home. All of those things you as a believer should know in your heart that is true. Then think about it. Dwell on it. Don't just think about it occasionally, but let that be a place where you're living. That's what the Apostle Paul is saying. That let your thinking be a place in which you live. And so he says, dwell on the things that are true. The next thing he says, that are honorable. Things that have a great reputation. Things that are honorable not only for you, but honorable for other men. You know what? This puts the idea of sin, of gossip, of unfaithful thoughts, it puts them aside. You see, we in our minds choose what we're going to dwell on. And Paul says, dwell on the things that are honorable, the things that are of good reputation, the things that are reputable. Think about those things. Let me just ask you, you think sin is reputable? No, it's not. It's not honorable. How many of you realize that sin dishonors the person, including the believer? And so dwell, live in, think about constantly these things that are honorable. And then he goes on and he says the things that are right. Now, this word right is actually the same Greek word as the word righteous. The things that are righteous. things that are right, things that are righteous before God, righteous ideas. You know what? If you and I would dwell on the righteousness that we have in Christ, you know what would happen? We would begin to lose a lot of the struggles and the sinful struggles in our lives. Why? Because we're thinking about righteousness. We're thinking about the things that are right. Our minds are inhabited with thoughts that are right. So the Apostle Paul tells these Philippians, these people that he loves so dearly, he's giving them this loving correction, these loving ideas. Think about the things that are right. And then the next thing that he says is things which are pure. Now, the Greek word for pure actually means things that are blameless, things that are innocent, things that are free from defilement. You know, if I had a glass of water here and I took a little bit of strychnine and put it in there. Strychnine's a poison, by the way, and put a little strychnine in there. You know what? I just defiled that glass of water and it became poisonous. It would kill me if I drank it. So when the Apostle Paul uses this word hagnos, he's talking about things that don't have anything in it that defile it, that make it bad, that make it dangerous. In other words, think on things that are without defilement, things that are pure. And then he goes on and he says, and things that are lovely. Now, the word lovely it's a compound word, and in that compound word we find this word phileo, which means things that are brotherly, things that are friendly, things that have a strong affection, things that are dear to you and acceptable to you. Think about those things that are dear to you. And then he goes on, he says, whatever is pure. Again, these are things that are true, or things that are of good repute. These are things that are true. You're thinking about it. And then he goes on and he says, if there is any excellence and anything worthy of praise, anything excellent means moral excellence, anything worthy of praise, anything that's commendable. And then he says, dwell on these things. In other words, he's saying these things, lagissimo, dwell on these things. It means to give an account of your mind, to think about it, to set your mind on it. Wow, what wonderful instruction the Apostle Paul is giving to the church at Philippi and to us. I pray that you will set in your heart to heed these things starting today and throughout the rest of your life. Thank you for joining us today. Join us again tomorrow as we continue our study in the book of Philippians. Thank you for watching.